All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. We have been going over Murox ASP.NET 4.6 Web Programming with C# 2015 6th edition, the PowerPoints, and I've also been going over some of the code with you. I'm on Chapter 4, and I'm up to page 152, the business classes of the shopping cart application. So, we're going to have first a product class, and that product class will have a product ID, a product name, a short description, which is pretty much like the product name, a long description, all right, more detail, the unit price, and an associated image. All right, now, what we have right here then is the first of 3 different classes that we're going to have in this application. The first is a product class, and the product class, it's simple. It has only properties in it. In other words, there are no methods, there are no functions associated with it. Each one of these, I shouldn't even say that, is going to have a get and a set, which will allow you to either set any one of these values or retrieve any one of these values. All right? The cart item class, if you notice there, it contains a product property, which is that product object. It also contains a quantity property, which is an int, which means how many of that product did you indeed order, or how many of that product are in your cart. It has an overloaded constructor, which allows you to create either an empty cart item object, if the cart is currently empty, or populate an existing cart item object with its product and quantity properties on creation. I should have mentioned that this right here, that when you create objects of this type of class, they're referred to as DTOs, or a data transfer object, because they're primarily used to store and transfer data. Here, the product object will be used to transfer data between the order page and the different business classes. All right, not only do we have a cart item, we've got a cart item list. In effect, this is our shopping cart. An object created from the cart item list class stores and keeps track of the different cart item objects. It will also have a static method called getCart, which retrieves a cart item list object from the session state if one is there. Otherwise, it'll create a cart item list object and add it to the session object. So next, the author starts showing you the code. You see again, the code for the product class is fairly simple. Now, this is not always how you set up gets and sets, but this is pretty much how you set up gets and sets for classes in C#. There is no constructor here, so what there is what's known as parameterless constructor. And for each one of these, then, all it has is a corresponding get and set method for each one of the properties that we saw: product name, name, short description, long description, unit price, and image file. Product ID, name, short description, long description, unit price, and image file. So the product class represents a product. The code for the cart item class includes 2 methods. The first one is going to be called add quantity. It's used to add the quantity that's passed to the cart item. So if I order 3 Freddy Krueger masks, I should be charged for 3 as opposed to just 1. So the method is called when the user adds a quantity to the cart for a product that's already in the cart. So if I decide I want more of the product. The display, which is the second one here, the display returns a string that formats the data in a cart item so it can be displayed in one line of the list box. So again, the cart item class represents a product that the user has added to the shopping cart, including the quantity they ordered. The card item list class is a little bit more complex. The card item list class is a list of card item objects. It's defined in a private field named cart items at the beginning of the class. Then the constructor initializes this field with a new list object of type cart item. Next, the count property, which is a read-only property, returns a count of the items. It's read-only because as you put items in and take items out, the system is keeping track of how many items are in the cart. Next is an overloaded read-only indexer. The first one of these gets a cart item in the list using the index that's passed to it. It's used to get the items in the cart when they're displayed in the list box on the cart page. The second one that's here gets a cart item using a product ID that's passed into it. Now, you're going to have to take a look at this because it's not easy stuff. This method here that's called getCart gets the cart item list object stored in the session state item named cart. It then checks to see if the object is equal to null. If it is, that means the cart has not yet been created, so a new cart item list object is created and added to the session state. Notice at first this is a static method. Second, because the code isn't in a code behind file, you can't use the session property of the page to refer to the session state object. Starting on page 158, they give you the web forms that are going to be used for this. So first, what we'll see first on page 159 and on page 161 is the ASPX code for the order page. What the author typically tries to do is to show you what he perceives as being the most important stuff being put there in yellow. You'll notice starting here that this page is formatted using Bootstrap and it has a custom style sheet. Some of the Bootstrap classes are designed to work together, and if they're not used correctly, it can throw off the formatting. We've got a div element underneath here that uses the Bootstrap container class. Right there. This div contains an HTML5 header and HTML5 main semantic elements. The header is going to use a Jumbotron for its basic formatting. The first row is divided into two columns. The first column contains a form group with a label element, the drop-down list that identifies the SQL data source, and the drop-down list it's bound to. Please remember from Chapter 3, the form group class defines a row on the form. And because of that, the form groups shown here actually define rows within the first column of the outer row, which is the div element with the row class. Again, heavy stuff. The order page and the cart page are what are shown here. They use Bootstrap for most of their formatting. The drop-down list is bound to an SQL data source control that retrieves product data from the Halloween database. The auto postback property for this is set to true, so the page posts back to the server when a different product is selected. So in other words, when you change product, it's got to call the server to update the stuff that's on the page. The Go to Cart button uses the postback URL ID so that the cart page is displayed. So in other words, there, when we click the appropriate button, we're sent to the appropriate or corresponding page. All right. On 162, 163, they talk about the code behind file for the order page. All right. The code starts using a directive for the system data namespace that's part of the .NET framework, and that allows you to use the database stuff, the SQL data source, etc. First, the page declares a class level variable that holds a product object that represents the item the user has selected from the drop-down list. Page load calls the data bind method of the drop-down list, all right, for the first time if postback isn't true. Again, heavy stuff here. Next, we see the ASPX file for the cart.aspx page, and that's on 165, and then the corresponding code, which is on 167. The cart.aspx page uses a list box to display the shopping cart. The label message view or label message server control has its enable view state property set to false, so that any message is set to it by C# code clear when the page posts back. The continue button uses cross-page posting to post back to the order page. The other buttons post back to the cart page. So on 167, they show you the corresponding code. This page starts with a series of directives that Visual Studio added when the page was created. All right, it declares a class level variable that will hold a cart item list object for the shopping cart. If the page is being loaded for the first time, the page load method will call the display cart method to set everything in motion. If the user clicks the remove item button, the btn remove click method is executed. If they click the empty cart button, the btn empty _click method is executed. Instead of using the clear method to clear the list, this method could call the display cart method if it wanted to. Also note that the cart page doesn't contain a method for the click event of the continue shopping button. All right, rather it just uses the postback URL to move you from one page to another. And then finally what's shown in here, starting on page 168 and 168 and 169, they show you the custom CSS for the shopping cart application. It uses the Bootstrap CSS classes for most of its layout and styling, but there's also a custom style sheet that overrides some of the Bootstrap styles and adds a couple new rule sets, as you can see right here. So this style sheet adjusts the Bootstrap container, the Jumbotron, and the button classes. It also overrides the default Bootstrap style for the label element. And it adds some custom styles for the individual label and the list box server controls. So that's it, the most heavy chapter we've seen thus far. We'll back it up a little bit in the next chapter, which I'll start going over tomorrow, because in the next chapter we'll go over how to test and debug an ASP.NET application. So I'll be back with that lecture at that time.